Nobody in that hearing room had ever seen Adam Schiff look quite like this, jaw locked, eyes darting, fingers drumming a nervous rhythm against the polished mahogany desk. This was a man who'd survived years of investigations, cross-examinations, and headline-grabbing scandals. But he'd never been cornered like this. Not by Jasmine Crockett. The cameras were already rolling when Jasmine entered. She didn't rush. She moved with a steady, unbothered calm that somehow made the tension sharper. Every reporter in the gallery knew something was about to happen. Nobody just requested a special session on congressional misuse of funds without having a smoking gun ready to set the place on fire. Aides whispered behind folders. Staffers exchanged glances. A low current of dread slithered through the chamber as Jasmine adjusted her microphone. In her hands, she held a slim black binder. Some thought it was just another set of prepared remarks. Those people didn't know Jasmine. "Mr. Chairman," she began, her voice smooth but carrying an edge that made the room feel smaller, "I'd like to enter into the record a set of documents that raise significant questions about Representative Schiff's recent expenditures." Schiff's mouth tightened. He leaned into his own mic with the tone of someone trying to hold the high ground before it crumbled. "Congresswoman Crockett, I trust we're not going to waste the committee's time with political theater." Jasmine didn't flinch. "If you're confident in your record, you shouldn't be worried." Her gaze didn't waver. She clicked the binder open with a soft snap that somehow sounded louder than a gavel. The first page was a summary audit. At the bottom, highlighted in clean neon yellow, sat the number that would detonate across every news channel before sundown: $100 million. Someone in the back sucked in a breath. Schiff glanced at the document and then up at Jasmine, and for the first time all morning, his eyes didn't look defiant, they looked unsure. And that was exactly how Jasmine wanted it. For nearly a decade, Adam Schiff had built a reputation as the man who never blinked. He'd faced down the most ruthless partisans on Capitol Hill, withstood endless TV panels dissecting every syllable he uttered, and emerged each time with his posture unbroken. But this moment, this was different. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just another colleague angling for a headline. She had come armed with receipts, and the calm in her voice was more dangerous than any shouting match. She lifted the first page out of the binder and held it up so the cameras could catch the header in bold black letters: Public Funds Allocation Report, Office of Representative Adam Schiff. "According to this audit," Jasmine said evenly, "your office approved over $100 million in expenditures earmarked for public educational grants. Yet less than 12% of those funds can be accounted for in verifiable projects." Murmurs broke out across the chamber. A committee member shifted uncomfortably. Schiff exhaled, his fingers pressing hard against the table. "That's a deliberate mischaracterization," he shot back, voice straining not to crack. "Every dollar was appropriated through standard oversight procedures." Jasmine nodded slowly, as if she'd been expecting exactly that response. She turned to the next page, another document with bright yellow highlights and rows of figures that looked more like an indictment than a budget sheet. "Then I'm sure you won't mind explaining," she continued, her tone soft but unsparing, "why over $40 million were wired to a shell organization in Delaware with no public-facing address, no staff directory, and no evidence of service delivery." The room went silent. Not just quiet, silent. Schiff opened his mouth, but nothing came out. It was as if he'd reached for the next line in a script that no longer existed. Jasmine laid the paper gently on the table between them. The camera zoomed in. Her voice dropped half a register, enough that everyone had to lean in to hear. "You've spent years telling America you stand for accountability," she said. "Today, we're going to find out if that was ever true." And just like that, the power dynamic flipped. Schiff, who had once been the face of righteous investigation, now looked like a man cornered by a truth he couldn't spin. Adam Schiff drew in a long, slow breath, trying to summon the poise he was famous for. But even as he straightened his jacket and smoothed the papers in front of him, the tension had already crept up the back of his neck, rooting itself there like a pulse he couldn't quiet. Jasmine waited. She didn't fill the space with more accusations. She didn't have to. The longer she let the silence grow, the more it pulled the air out of Schiff's carefully composed demeanor. Finally, he managed to speak, his voice clipped. That organization is a legitimate nonprofit. It was established to distribute funds to educational initiatives that would have otherwise been stalled in bureaucratic gridlock. You know as well as I do that sometimes the process requires unconventional partnerships. Jasmine lifted an eyebrow, almost as if she pitied him for the weakness of the answer. Unconventional is a word you use when you're trying not to say unaccountable. A soft gasp rippled through the chamber. Even the aides behind Schiff were exchanging glances, suddenly aware that this wasn't going to be another performance where he outmaneuvered everyone with lawyerly finesse. She flipped to the next tab in her binder. Another document, this one bearing the watermark of the Treasury Department. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She knew the cameras were already locked on every movement she made. She simply laid the paper flat, tapped the highlighted section with her finger, and spoke in a tone so calm it verged on lethal. Since you've assured us of your transparency, perhaps you'd like to address this direct transfer, made in March of this year, to a consulting firm owned by one of your campaign bundlers. A firm with exactly one listed employee. Schiff's mouth opened, then closed. Was that also a creative solution to bureaucratic red tape? Jasmine asked. He didn't answer. Somewhere in the gallery, a reporter's phone buzzed, and a text notification flashed across the screen. This is about to go viral. Clip it now. Jasmine could feel it too, the shift in the air when a narrative starts collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions. But she wasn't here for the spectacle. She was here because millions of taxpayers had trusted the word integrity, and she intended to find out if it still meant anything. She turned back to Schiff, her gaze unwavering. "Tell me, Congressman," she said, "when did accountability become optional?" For a moment, Adam Schiff just stared at the document, as if he could will the words to rearrange themselves into something less damning. But Jasmine didn't flinch, and she didn't blink. She simply let him sit there, locked under the weight of her silence. A member of the committee coughed, trying to break the tension. No one moved. No one looked away. Schiff's voice came out quieter than before, stripped of its polished certainty. That transfer was processed as part of a community engagement initiative. Which resulted, Jasmine interrupted, in a single report so vague it could have been written by a chatbot. The gallery burst into uneasy murmurs. The committee chair tried to tap the gavel, but even he looked reluctant to intervene. This wasn't just a disagreement. It was the moment when the thin veneer of credibility started to peel off. Jasmine turned to face the rest of the panel. "Let's be clear about what this is," she said. $100 million allocated to help working families, students, and seniors who are fighting to keep their lights on. And instead, what did we get? A maze of shell companies, invoices no one can verify, and a public figure who keeps calling it all misunderstandings. She shifted back to Schiff, her tone dropping to something almost conversational, but with an edge that could cut glass. "You keep telling the American people you stand for oversight. You call yourself a champion of transparency. So I'm asking you, right here, right now, who signed off on this transfer?" Schiff's eyes flickered to the committee chair, to his aides, back to the rows of journalists scribbling every word. His jaw clenched, the strain showing for the first time. "I did," he said finally. The sentence hung in the air like a confession. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't even smile. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Because the first step toward accountability is admitting what you did." She paused, letting the cameras drink it in. This moment when power cracked and something real slipped through. And then she leaned forward, her voice carrying across the marble room, calm and devastating. "But don't mistake admission for absolution." The room erupted, not in applause, not in outrage, but in something rarer, stunned silence. And Jasmine knew this was the moment the story stopped being about rumors and started being about receipts. It only took a second for the stunned silence to morph into 100 camera flashes, each one illuminating the look on Adam Schiff's face. He tried to gather himself, but the admission had ripped something open that no amount of practiced rhetoric could close again. Jasmine didn't relent. She opened her binder to another tabbed section, the rustle of paper almost deafening in the hush. "You want the public to believe this was just poor management," she said, her tone low and steady. "But you and I both know there's a difference between mismanagement and manipulation." She lifted another document, an internal memo, marked confidential in red ink. The text was projected onto the hearing room screens, letter by letter. "This memo," Jasmine continued, "details how those funds were rerouted, intentionally, to organizations that exist only on paper. No staff, no services delivered, no audits completed. Just P.O. boxes and invoices signed by someone who conveniently disappeared when reporters came calling." Schiff swallowed, but he didn't interrupt. "You can spin this any way you want," Jasmine said, locking eyes with him. "You can call it a clerical error. You can call it an oversight. But you cannot call it justice." A low murmur rippled across the committee as aides leaned into each other's ears. Even the chair looked like he was searching for an escape hatch. Jasmine set the document down and folded her hands. "Do you know how many families in my district applied for those funds? How many were told there wasn't enough money left? Single mothers. Veterans. Grandparents taking care of grandkids because the system failed them the first time." Her voice sharpened, not with anger but with something harder, resolve. "And while they were rationing groceries, you were signing off on checks to shell entities. You were campaigning on integrity while the ledger told a different story." Schiff shifted again, but the movement looked almost reflexive, like a man who no longer knew where to look. In the press gallery, someone whispered, "It's over." The phrase spread from mouth to mouth, a chain reaction of disbelief and awe. But Jasmine wasn't done. She leaned forward just enough for her voice to carry without raising it. "You called this a misunderstanding. I call it what it is, systemic theft, packaged in bureaucracy and sold as leadership." The lights overhead felt hotter. The room felt smaller. And Schiff's famous composure was dissolving under the weight of something he could no longer control. Jasmine sat back, her expression unflinching. "The American people deserve better than excuses," she said quietly. "They deserve the truth. All of it." The chair fumbled for his gavel, clearing his throat, but the sound was weak, like someone trying to reassert order that had already left the building. And in that moment, no one watching, in that room or across the country, could pretend this was just politics as usual. The gavel finally came down, but it sounded like a concession, not a command. Schiff looked ready to respond, ready to spin, but Jasmine simply lifted her hand. "You've had your turn," she said calmly. "For years." It wasn't just her words that made the room go still. It was the way she said them, no bravado, no tremor, just the certainty of someone who had receipts. A reporter's voice called out from the back, "Congresswoman Crockett, do you believe this rises to the level of criminal negligence?" Jasmine didn't turn to the cameras. She kept her eyes on Schiff. "I'm not a prosecutor," she replied. "But I am a representative of people who have been lied to long enough. And if the Justice Department won't investigate this, then Congress damn well will." She picked up another folder, thicker this time, marked with a seal that suggested it hadn't been easy to get, and laid it flat on the table. "This is a full audit trail of every disbursement you approved. Every wire transfer. Every authorization code." She tapped the cover once, softly, like a warning. "You don't have to answer to me, Congressman. But you are going to answer to them." The chair looked uneasy. "Perhaps we should." "No," Jasmine cut in. "The people who trusted this process deserve to see this through." For a moment, Schiff tried to find the edge again, the place where he could push back. But his voice came out thin, defensive. "I have never taken a cent that wasn't." "You don't have to finish that sentence," Jasmine interrupted. "Because I've already read every one of these documents, and I'm prepared to read them into the record, line by line." The silence that followed wasn't just shock, it was a collective recognition that something irreversible had happened. The live stream chat exploded. "Oh my God, she's not bluffing. This is history. She's about to bury him." Jasmine looked around the committee, scanning the faces of members who had tried for years to pretend they couldn't see the rot. "Let's be clear," she said. "This is not personal. This is about a culture that treats public money as a private slush fund. And about the arrogance of thinking no one would ever connect the dots." She paused. "Let it sink in. Consider the dots connected." Someone in the gallery clapped, just once, but the sound cracked through the tension like a gunshot. The chair gave up trying to quiet the room. Schiff's eyes dropped to the folder. And Jasmine simply waited, as if she knew the country was still listening, waiting for him to say something honest for once. But he didn't. Because in that moment, there was nothing left to say. It was the way Jasmine didn't flinch that made the moment even more unnerving. Most people, facing a senior congressman with decades of influence, would have softened their tone, would have tried to walk it back just enough to look respectable. She didn't. She flipped open the folder and started reading, her voice clear, steady, devastating. "Disbursement number 847203, she began, authorized by Representative Adam Schiff on May 14, $1.7 million to an entity called Harbor Gate Solutions LLC. Schiff interjected, "That was a vendor for cybersecurity services." Jasmine kept reading, unbothered. "Registered to a P.O. box in Wilmington, Delaware. Cross-referenced with campaign filings, same address used by 3 other shell corporations, all linked to consulting firms you personally endorsed." She looked up. "I don't think the people of California elected you to funnel public money into your friends' accounts." Someone behind Schiff muttered, "Jesus." The chair attempted to regain control. "Congresswoman Crockett, perhaps we should recess for." "No," she said, her voice still calm but now carrying the edge of finality. "We're going to finish this." She pulled the next document. A photograph. A grainy black and white image of a conference room. Schiff was seated at the head of the table, signing an authorization. Behind him, the same consultant whose name was on 3 of the transfers. "You claimed you never met this individual," she said, laying the photo flat so the cameras could see. "Would you care to correct the record?" Schiff looked cornered, the polished veneer starting to crack. "That meeting was about technology modernization. That picture proves nothing." Jasmine tilted her head slightly, her expression almost sad. "That picture proves you were there. The invoices prove where the money went. And the fact that you're still trying to pretend otherwise proves you think you're untouchable." The room was so quiet you could hear the flick of her next page turning. A staffer to Jasmine's right whispered something, but she didn't break eye contact with Schiff. Instead, she leaned in. "You know," she said softly, "I used to believe that corruption looked like briefcases full of cash in parking garages. But I've learned it looks a lot more like this, paperwork that almost no one bothers to read. Until someone decides to." She tapped the stack one last time. "This is the problem with men like you. You think power is a shield. But today, it's a spotlight." And for the first time since she'd started, Schiff looked like he believed her. Outside the hearing room, reporters were already sprinting toward the press pen, phones held up to capture the footage before it disappeared behind paywalls or red tape. Inside, the silence thickened, like the air itself had to reckon with what had just happened. Schiff reached for his water but didn't lift it. His hand hovered over the glass, fingers twitching faintly. Jasmine waited, giving him every chance to respond. When he didn't, she continued. "You authorized over $4 million in technology services contracts that never produced a single public report. Not one measurable outcome. But you did receive a $250,000 campaign donation from a PAC linked to the same firms. Coincidence?" Schiff finally asked, his voice rasping. Jasmine didn't smirk. Didn't gloat. She simply said, "It's always a coincidence, isn't it? Until someone puts it all together." The chair tried again. "Representative Crockett, I must insist we let the record show," Jasmine interrupted, "that when a woman comes with receipts, the first instinct of this institution is to shut her up." She laid the last folder down, thicker than the others. A compilation of public contracts, cross-referenced disbursements, and donations going back nearly a decade. "You want to know why people don't trust this body anymore?" she asked, voice lower now, so every word seemed to stretch across the entire hall. "Because they see men like you stand behind podiums and call it patriotism, while you drain public money into your own ambitions." Schiff finally picked up the water glass, took a sip, and set it back down. "I've given my life to public service," he said, measured. "And what did it cost the people you were supposed to serve?" Jasmine shot back. You could see it then, his jaw tightening, his gaze darting to the cameras. The performance was unraveling, second by second. Jasmine looked around the room. "I have no illusions that you'll resign," she said, voice steady as iron. "But I want the record to reflect this moment. Not the version you'll tell on cable news, but the truth of it, a man caught siphoning public trust, with no defense left but bluster." A woman in the gallery wiped tears from her cheek. Another simply shook her head, as if she'd waited years to hear somebody say it out loud. And still Jasmine wasn't done. She lifted the last document, a plain typed letter. "This," she said, holding it so the cameras could zoom in, "is a statement from 34 small business owners in your district. They never got the contracts. They never got the grants. They were told to be patient while you funneled their opportunities into your cronies' pockets." Then she set it down. And she let the silence speak for itself. For a moment, nobody breathed. The chair shifted uncomfortably, as though he'd rather be anywhere else. One of Schiff's aides, standing near the back wall, pressed her palm to her forehead and whispered something to the colleague beside her. Schiff swallowed, searching for a script that wasn't there. "Representative Crockett," he began, "these are serious accusations." "They're not accusations," Jasmine cut in, her voice almost gentle. "They're documented expenditures, filings, and the signatures of people who never got their fair shot." She turned to the cameras, eyes steady. "If I were you, I'd stop worrying about the optics and start worrying about the subpoenas." A ripple of shocked laughter broke out in the press area. Schiff's mouth worked, but no words came out. Jasmine leaned forward, elbows resting on the table, her tone shifting to something quieter, almost compassionate. "I don't hate you," she said. "I hate what you stand for. This notion that as long as you wrap your corruption in a flag, no one will question it." She picked up the thick folder again, thumbed through it, then looked him square in the eye. "Tell me something, Congressman, when you go home and look in the mirror, do you really believe you've done right by your voters? Or are you just convincing yourself you're too important to fail?" He didn't answer. Behind her, the chair's gavel struck the wood once, an empty attempt at regaining control. "Order," he said, voice hoarse. "Order." But there was no order left to restore. The illusion had cracked open, and everyone knew it. Schiff tried to pivot. "The American people deserve representatives who care more about policy than spectacle." "Then maybe you shouldn't have turned their tax dollars into your personal war chest," Jasmine replied calmly. The entire room exhaled, as if they'd all been holding their breath for the last 10 minutes. And then, finally, Jasmine gathered her papers, meticulous, damning, undeniable, and slipped them into her binder. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The facts spoke louder than any monologue. As she stood, she looked directly into the cameras again. "You can call this a spectacle if you want," she said, her tone even, unshakable. "But to the people watching at home who've been told to accept less, to expect less, to settle for the crumbs of leadership, today was proof you don't have to stay quiet." A beat of total, electric silence. Then Jasmine turned and walked out, her footsteps echoing through a chamber that suddenly felt twice as small. The moment Jasmine left the chamber, it was as if the oxygen followed her out the door. Reporters surged into the aisle, pressing microphones at Schiff, who still hadn't moved. His face looked drained, like someone realizing too late that the ground had shifted under his feet. Outside, the marble steps of the Capitol were already crowded. A sea of phones pointed toward the entrance, waiting to capture any glimpse of her. When Jasmine finally emerged, there was no entourage, no triumphant gesture. Just her, calm, collected, binder in hand. A young journalist shouted over the din, "Congresswoman Crockett, do you have any comment about Representative Schiff's response?" Jasmine paused at the bottom step. She didn't look angry. She looked like someone who had been waiting years for this moment. "My comment," she said, her voice carrying over the crowd, "is simple. You can't spend decades selling influence and then act shocked when someone sends you the bill." Another reporter called out, "What do you say to those accusing you of grandstanding?" She tilted her head slightly. "I say maybe they're not used to seeing someone fight back without apology." With that, she turned and began walking toward the line of black SUVs idling at the curb. Every camera tracked her, and for a second, the crowd fell quiet, just the shuffle of feet and the whir of camera shutters. Inside the Capitol, Schiff finally found his voice. His aides were whispering furiously, strategizing damage control, drafting statements that would try to make the truth sound negotiable. But it was too late. The clip of Jasmine calling out $100 million in misused funds was already climbing toward 1 million views before she even reached her car door. Back inside her SUV, Jasmine sat back against the leather seat, eyes closed. Her phone buzzed relentlessly, texts from supporters, staff, even a few stunned colleagues who had never imagined she'd go this far. The driver asked softly, "Home, Congresswoman?" Jasmine opened her eyes, that same steady resolve in them. "Not yet. The work's not finished." She turned to look out the tinted window as the Capitol steps receded in the distance. For once, she wasn't thinking about tomorrow's headlines. She was thinking about the people whose names were buried in those spreadsheets. The teachers whose budgets had been slashed, the veterans whose benefits got delayed, the kids who ate dinner out of vending machines while politicians threw fundraisers. This wasn't about one hearing. It was about every person who'd ever been told their struggle was too small to matter. And Jasmine Crockett had just made it very clear, no one was too big to be held accountable. This story wasn't just about one confrontation. It was about exposing how power hides behind polished speeches and sealed folders. It was about showing the cost of silence and the price of looking the other way. When Jasmine Crockett stood up that day, she didn't just challenge Adam Schiff. She challenged every comfortable assumption, every excuse that keeps injustice alive because it's easier not to look too closely. And in that moment, she reminded all of us, real courage starts when you speak the truth while everyone else is trying to bury it. When you stand your ground knowing it might cost you, but staying silent would cost even more. Maybe the most important question she left behind was this: are you ready to demand better, or will you settle for watching from the sidelines? The answer is yours to decide.